of the proofs for the establisher of the Baha'i faith. All of the religions have had an establisher. And just as the manifestations and prophets are prophesied by name, address, date, and profession, in this revelation, the establisher is also prophesied with golden criteria, which is the measuring rod to determine if a person has been sent by God or not, that he's prophesied by the name that he's going to come in, the address where he's supposed to appear, the date that he's supposed to arrive, and where you may go to find him. These are the 4 factors you find on a calling card or a business card, and only one person in the world fulfills a business card. Only one person in the world fulfills the criteria given in the Bible for the coming of the promised one. For instance, there was only one person prophesied by the name of Jesus that was born in Bethlehem, that came at the date given by Daniel, and that atoned for the sins by dying on the cross. And that prophecy will never be fulfilled again by anybody else. But there's the establisher of the faith this time, and he also is fulfilled in this manner. Before we get into those proofs, though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, because this is germane to what we're going to talk about. My parents were Baha'is before they had married and before I was conceived. And my mother's mother and father both were Baha'is even before that. They were among the first Baha'is in America. They met Abdu'l-Baha when he appeared here, and they were very well studied in the Baha'i faith, read the books, and were busy teaching the cause to other people. Being brought up in a Baha'i home, I had the occasion to hear my father and my mother talk the Baha'i faith to people that come to the door and who they met in the marketplace and workshop. And they had firesides in the home, and I had the experience of hearing my parents teach the faith, as well as I attended Baha'i firesides of other people, as well as attending the Baha'i centers, where we had speakers possibly once a week that would come and give lectures on the Baha'i faith, public lectures. So at an early age, I began teaching the Baha'i faith myself. First to the youth that I used to run around with, go to school with, and as we got older, I became more proficient, and I was able to bring several of these young people into the faith. Later on, after I got married, my wife and I finished college and get our doctorate in natural medicine. We didn't have too much time for teaching at that time, because we both had to work as we worked our way through school. But after we had got out in practice, after practicing in Chicago for a while, we moved to St. Louis into a mansion, and we finally moved the Baha'i Center into our home because it was very large. And again, we were back in the teaching again. And this went on until Shoghi Effendi had 2 7-year plans for bringing the faith to the peoples of this world, and he had a 3-year period in between the 2 7-year plans. But instead of making another 7-year plan and having a 3-year period in between it, he had a 10-year, called a 10-year World Crusade, to bring it to the remaining people of the world. And this plans of Shoghi Effendi was carrying out Abdu'l-Baha's injunction of it was called the Abdu'l-Baha's Divine Plan to bringing the faith to the world. And my wife and I participated in this 10-year World Crusade. We went we give up our practice, our livelihood, our medical equipment, x-ray machines and so forth, and went to 2 tiny islands in the Indian Ocean. The first one was Reunion Island. They'd never heard of the Baha'i Faith there. We were the first ones to bring the message of the Baha'i Faith to Reunion. Adelie Ryan had gone to Mauritius, and she had brought 2 people into the faith there in a period of about 2 or 3 years. One was a Chinese boy, and the other one was a person from France. But she wasn't able to contact the mass of the people in the island. That is the Creole, the Hindu, and the Muslim, which were the predominant people there. So when I came to the island, we made contact and got into the mass of the people, and in a short time, we were only there for 14 months, we had over 150 people come into the faith in that period of time, and very well educated and deepened into the cause. And then we came back to America and was in America for a while, and we were disenchanted in the way that the American Baha'is, as well as the assemblies and the National Spiritual Assembly were carrying on. And we had decided that we would go back out to another place. This time we decided to go to Paraguay in South America. They were having difficulty making contact with the people in that place. It was very highly political and sort of a dictatorship. So we were going to drive down on the International Highway. While I was in the island, we was in the islands 4 years. I bought a new car just before we went down there, a new Chrysler. When I got back, it only had about 10,000 miles on it. I had it in storage at the time. So the car was practically new, and I made it a nice trailer, and we got our belongings that we were going to take down there, and we put it behind the Chrysler, and we started out. But before this happened, Shoghi Effendi had sent special messages to the Baha'is in the United States. He called for conferences to be held in which he sent messages. And large numbers of people attended these conferences. There wasn't just one, but there's, I don't remember, 2, 3, 4. And these were, in the messages, were very condemning to what the National Spiritual Assembly and the Hands of the Faith were doing here in America and throughout the world. He just didn't, but he was primarily attacking the American headquarters here. And it was, these weren't printed and sent around. They had to attend the conference to hear them. And my wife and I attended these conferences, and I thought maybe what I was thinking about what the Baha'is were doing were something was wrong with me, that it made me think that they were up to something nefarious, you know. But when Shoghi Effendi condemns them, I wasn't so defensive as far as how I was seeing the thing. So I then decided that I needed to get out of America, away from this, go someplace where people were pure and teach the cause. That the people coming into the faith in America here were being coming under this administration that was oppressive and that were doing things that Shoghi Effendi wasn't happy about. So we got as far as El Paso, and it was in sometime in December, I believe. And it was cold, and on the way to El Paso, Opal and I, we got come down with the Asiatic flu. And we were very, very sick. And we made it into El Paso, and we went to a motel, and we went to bed. And we, of course, doctors of natural medicine. We use the natural methods in fasting with our cleansing processes, and it took maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days in order to overcome it. And after we got well enough, we got the telephone book down to look up to see if there was any Baha'is in the El Paso area. And we contacted one that was the secretary there, and we asked them if there was any firesides or meetings. They said they was having one that night. So Opal and I, we attended the fireside, and they read to us a cablegram that Shoghi Effendi had died. They read one, they said they'd got a one previous to that that said that Shoghi Effendi was sick. And they wanted the Baha'is to pray for him. And the next cablegram, they stated that he had died. In fact, he had died before when they sent out that cablegram that he was sick, he was already dead. And why Rhea Khanum sent that cablegram out that he was sick when she knew he was dead has never been explained. Anyhow, then they read other cablegrams that the hands of the faith had met, and they declared that God had broken his covenant, that considering the Davidic kingship, that he decides to do away with the whole thing, and that they did away with the guardianship of the faith. He said that Shoghi Effendi didn't have a son, and that he left no will. But there's nothing in the will and testament that says under such circumstances that the guardianship would come to an end. It says if he doesn't have a son, then he has to appoint another one, another branch, or an oxon after Baha's son. And it says that in the will and testament it doesn't say that he had to appoint him in a will. It says he does do it during his lifetime, meaning that he was not supposed to appoint him in his will, but and he'd already appointed, Shoghi Effendi had already appointed Mason Rimi, Abdul Baha's son, to be a successor 5 or 6 years before he himself died. Shoghi Effendi died of the Asiatic flu, the same Asiatic flu that Opal and I were sick with. Only he passed on. And at this time, these people took over the Baha'i faith. Later on, we knew that there was a guardian. We didn't know who he was. We knew that Shoghi Effendi appointed Mason Rimi, but whether he had Shoghi Effendi had a natural son that was off to college or something like that, we didn't know what the facts were. But later on, Mason Rimi broke with the covenant-breaking hands. He said that he'd gone along with them, hoping to persuade them not to break the covenant as they were. But they said that they would follow all the provisions that Shoghi Effendi had laid down, that he was still their guardian although he had passed on. He says, if you will follow everything that Shoghi Effendi has laid out for 1963, I'll go along with you. Well, what Shoghi Effendi had proposed for 1963 is that International Baha'i Council that Mason Rimi was the president of was supposed to become a world court in 1963. And then after that, then the membership, the body would be elected. But it didn't say that they had to be elected, just the body. And and they also said that this International Baha'i Council that's become a world court would evolve or blossom into the Universal House of Justice in the fullness of time, whenever that was. So here we have a document from Shoghi Effendi, and one of the goals for 1963 was that the International Baha'i Council, that was the embryonic Universal House of Justice, was supposed to go into its next stage of world court in 63. In 1959, Shoghi Effendi passed in 57. In 1959, they had a conclave, and the hands decided to do away with Shoghi Effendi's International Baha'i Council. Instead of it becoming a world court in 1957, they said they will pass by that phase of it, and they will jump to the conclusion and establish a Universal House of Justice without a guardian. Well, when I was in El Paso, and we we saw what the hell was happening, that they were breaking the covenant. I said, well, now isn't the time to go to South America. There's going to be a battle here. That there's some people that Shoghi Effendi was already pointing out as being perverse at the head of the Baha'i faith, including the Hands and the National Spiritual Assemblies. And now they're coming along with the Blarney that God broke his covenant, that there's not going to be, he's not going to fulfill it. But God never breaks his covenant. Man breaks the covenant. And this is just a clear sign of covenant breaking. So we decided to stay in America, and when Mason Remy broke with the Hands in '59 after they decided to break the provisions that Shoghi Effendi had laid out for them, which they had agreed that they was going to follow. They broke the trust with the Guardian. He broke with them and came to America, and he proclaimed to the Baha'i world here that indeed he was the Guardian, that he was appointed by Shoghi Effendi, and that he was Abdul Baha's son, he was adopted by Abdul Baha, and that he was the Guardian. But the Hands of the Faith were more busy with getting control of the Baha'i faith, dipping their hands into the funds, and to take over the institutions and the membership of the faith, to get control of it. Mason Remy said that they didn't want to have a guardian. And this is true especially of the Persian Baha'is. They never wanted a guardian in the first place. They didn't want the Davidic kingship. They were come out of Islam, and Islam's always hated the Jews, and as a descendant of David would be the tribe of Judah. And because of these inherent hatreds, they weren't, just like the Jews didn't want Jesus, a carpenter's son, to be their Messiah. The Muslims didn't want Baha'u'llah, descendants, to be the guardian of the faith. And also in the West, the Hands of the Faith in the West didn't want a guardian because Shoghi Effendi was a hard taskmaster, and that they wanted to have the more laissez-faire, the easy life. And so they put out the baloney that the Shoghi Effendi give us all the guidance that we need for the next 2,000 years or next 1,000 years, whatever it was, until the next manifestation. We don't need a guardian, and that we have his writings. Well, we have his writings, but they wouldn't even follow him. What's the use of having the writing? The purpose of having a guardian is to see that they follow the writings. Eh? And that's the purpose of the kingship, is to see that the democracy under it follows the Constitution or the covenant. And these guys, they said, well, if they're going to take over, the first thing they have to do, see, the Davidic kingship is called the guardian. The word guardian means guard. That his job is to guard the thing, see? Well, if you have a junkyard out there and you have some guard dogs, you don't go in there and try to steal some of the parts, you know. Because the dogs, they usually use these here Doberman pincers, you know, the Doberman pincer, and they're really ferocious. So if they want to get in there, what they do is they kill off the dog. They threw some poison meat in there, see? They kill the dog, and then they can go in and rob the place. Well, that's what they were concerned in doing, is to get rid of the guardian so that they could rob the Baha'i faith. And we have a Baha'i gate on our hands. So this, at this time, I became very close and knowledgeable of the guardian, Mason Remy. He came to Washington, D.C. I met him there, and he explained to me the whole covenant-breaking deal that was going on for that 2 years from the time that Shoghi Effendi died until the time that he parted. And he wrote many things. He wrote the last appeal. He wrote a first, second, and third encyclical letter. In the second encyclical letter, he expels the hands from the covenant-breaking hands from the faith. In the third encyclical letter, he expels all of those that follow these covenant-breaking hands from the Baha'i religious faith. So the Baha'i, those that call themselves the Baha'i world faith, are all expelled from the faith, and they're covenant breakers. So this, we were then trying to do what we were trying to do. We were trying to get to contact these people that were under the covenant breakers. that weren't sure that they were into the right thing. That is, wavering in their covenant breaking. You know what I mean? Looking for something, but still not knowing what to do. And we started to try to contact these people in order to explain to them just exactly what did happen. And also, we continued to teach the true cause of God under the guardianship and under the covenant. And a number of people, thousands of people, were under the provisions of the covenant, under the guardian, and it was called, Mason Remy called it the Orthodox Baha'i Faith, meaning the true Baha'i Faith. And we were increasing in numbers very rapidly. Some of the friends wanted to have a national spiritual assembly under the guardian. The covenant breakers continued in the administration, taking over the membership in the institutions and the administration, the whole thing. And I was in opposition to this. Each year at Rizwan they made this proposal. And in 1962 they made it, and it's quite strong. And I talked against it. I didn't think that we ought to have that. The administration always seemed to go into some sort of perversion. The people get control of that, and then they have to control the Baha'i Faith, and then they set their will above the will of God. But in 1963, in January, the guardian wrote me, and of course he was always writing me, and I was writing him. He said, "Dr. Jensen, don't you think it'd be a good idea if we had a National Spiritual Assembly under his guardianship?" But he says, not like Shoghi Effendi had to control everything in the Baha'i Faith, but just two things. One is to save the waverers, those that are wavering in their violation. And two is to organize the teaching effort so that it could go forward. And I wrote back to him and I says, under these conditions I would highly support this. And so therefore he called a meeting, called for a convention to be held in the Rizwan period, that's between April the 21st and May the 2nd, to elect a National Spiritual Assembly. And so I was elected delegate for the state of Missouri. And I had always been elected delegate as long as I lived in Missouri to the National Convention when it was held in Wilmette. The Covenant Breakers were still having their elections of their National Spiritual Assemblies. They were going to have theirs in Wilmette. We were going. The Guardian said that he was setting up Santa Fe as a central part of the faith in America for the Baha'is under his guardianship. So they got together and they decided to have it on a weekend, a Saturday and a Sunday, but to have it go 4 days, and maybe a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I think that it was supposed to start around the 23rd or 24th, something like that. I think it was the 24th supposed to start, with the 24th, 25th or something. Anyhow, I got down to Santa Fe on the 23rd. And there was a number of other people that were different states that had elected their delegates. And the delegate for Florida was already there. He was a man by the name of Rex King. And several of the other delegates from different parts of the United States were there. The rest of them hadn't arrived yet. And I find that Rex King came on the 21st day of April. And that there's during Rizwan there are 3 holy days. The first one is the 21st day of April. The second one is the 29th day of April, and the third one is the 2nd of May. The second one, May, is the last of the 12 days of Rizwan, or April the 21st is the first. And there's a feast on each one of them, a special feast. It's not the regular 19-day feast, but a special feast. And that Rex King came to Santa Fe. He'd moved from Florida to Las Vegas, New Mexico, which is 70 miles away. And he came down there on the 21st to observe the feast, the first day of Rizwan, or the 23rd of April, with the Baha'is of Santa Fe and the delegates that were coming from other places. And there was quite a conclave of them. Maybe a fourth or a third of the delegates were already there and they were doing that. But I didn't get there until the 23rd, and I think the next day, the 24th, is when they were starting their convention. And when I got there, I found that things were already starting to go awry. Something was phony was being pulled off there. See, the heart of man is evil. Sometimes even if they become the Baha'i, they don't all live the life. And the trouble with the Baha'i faith under Shoghi Effendi was that these evil ones had gotten control of the administration, and this is what Shoghi Effendi was beefing about, that they were abusing their positions. And so when I got there, I saw that there had been some campaigning going on, and that the people there were very cool to me. And I didn't know why, because every time that I've ever been in a Baha'i meeting, under the Guardian especially, they were very warm to me, because those that come under the Guardian, a large part of them, they come into the Baha'i faith through my teaching. They're my spiritual children. And usually the rest of them some of them were my lifelong friends that were Baha'i. We were Baha'i kids growing up together, you know. But they were cool. And very short, I didn't know what was happening there, what was the cause for this. But later on, I found out that that Rex King had been telling the believers, the delegates, that he was to be the next Guardian. And that he had a number of letters from Mason Remy, the Guardian, in which he interprets it was grooming him to be the next Guardian. And that he was praising Rex King, that he knew all about the Baha'i faith and so forth and so on. And Rex King did know the Baha'i faith real well. He was an excellent teacher. But here he was telling these people that he's being groomed for the Guardian. Well, these people were saying to themselves, if he's going to be the Guardian, they better butter their bread or feather their nest, you know. Some people make it more blunt and they say kiss butt, you know. So the thing is that these people were cool to me because he'd been talking against me. And he knew that I was a stickler for what was right. That I wouldn't go for any hanky-panky going on. But for a bigger reason, my wife and I were the only knights that were under the Guardian. And he knew the prophecy of the knights that they're going to establish the faith. So just like the covenant breakers, in order to take over the faith from after Shoghi Effendi died, is to get rid of the guard dogs, see? So Rex King, in order to take over the Baha'i faith under Mason Remy's guardianship, he had to get rid of the guard dog, so to speak, which was the knight. And this is why he had attacked me. And the next day, or the day that we had the election, the way they had Shoghi Effendi set up the administration is that we had the plurality type of election, that we were given a ballot, which was just a piece of paper with 9 lines, and that every Baha'i under the guardianship was a candidate. There was nobody nominated. Any Baha'i could vote for any 9 people that were a member, you know. And the 9 receiving the highest number of votes was the spiritual assembly, the National Spiritual Assembly. The same thing consisted for local assemblies. Each city had their own local assembly, but we were electing a national one, and the different states met in conventions to elect their delegates, and these delegates were given a paper for 9 names. And I come in 9th place. I was tied with another person, with Charlie Murphy. He's in Denver now. So there had to be a runoff, and I was elected with 1 vote more than him in the runoff. And I barely got on that assembly. Now, I didn't care whether I got on. I'm just stating this was what had happened there. And I got on there, and then after I was elected, I think it was on a Sunday we had the election. We went and the convention closed at that time. We then went, the 9 of us went into a separate room or a separate address, and then we started to elect the officers between us. And they consisted of a chairman, vice chairman, secretary, and treasurer. And the first one they started voting for was the chairman, or the president. And Rex King and I think several other were nominated for the chairman. But he says, take my name off. He says, I don't want an office in this thing. He says, I just want to be a member. And they pleaded with him. He says, no. So, okay, so Audie Petzold was elected to be the chairman. So then they had the next was for the vice chairman. And again, they put up Rex King's name. And he refused the same way, saying that he didn't want to be, an officer. And Charles Gaines was elected in that position. So then they took nominations for secretary. And again, they put up Rex King's name for secretary. And he said, well, if you people keep on insisting me taking an office, I will. And they closed the nominations. He was elected by a unanimous vote. They didn't, have any other nominations. And then they elected Clarence McClymont as the treasurer. Well, as it turns out to be, that the secretary position is the powerhouse in the Baha'i administration. Just like in the Communist Party, the secretary runs the country. He's above the president. He's more important than the president. And in the Baha'i faith, the secretary has the minutes and he has the correspondence. And he's practically in control. And this is what had happened in America. Horace Holly, he made the Baha'i administration. He wrote it all out. He was a lawyer. And he was elected the secretary way back in 1922, I believe, or 23, whenever they started the administration. And he remained the secretary up until his death, way up until after the covenant-breaking thing. And he run the Baha'i faith in America with an iron hand. And he's the one that you had to go to if you really wanted something, and you had to be on his side or you didn't get it, It's sort of a political type of non-political organization. And Rex King already told him that he was going to be the next guardian. He had no problem at all to get elected to whatever he wanted to. But he didn't take the nomination for chairman or vice chairman because he wanted the secretary job. And he had people in there that was going to see that he got something in there. So anyhow, as it turns out, the Rex King then starts to take over the Baha'i faith, just like Horace Holly did. And such things, he says that the different Baha'i literature should be brought to Santa Fe for distribution, and I was very much in favor of that. In fact, I don't know, I may have seconded that motion, that in order to coordinating, that we all written a lot of different things that were very effective in bringing people into the faith, as well as bringing, saving the waverers. And I had written half a dozen different things that were very effective. So the next meeting, we'd all brought our literature that we had produced to the Santa Fe, and for the purpose of the people write in from the covenant breakers want to know what it's all about. They would have somebody there to find the appropriate priest to send them, see? So then the following meeting we come to, Rex King said he went through all of these different things that were brought in, and he says, none of it is satisfactory, it's all a bunch of rubbish. He says, I make a motion that it all be destroyed, we burn it. So I got a cable out to the Guardian, and he cabled back cease and desist, So then he makes a motion that only he and Charles Gaines could write the Baha'i literature. And that passed not unanimously, 8-1. From that time on, it was 8-1. I was always the descending vote, you know. That only he and Charles Gaines could write the literature. And then he said that they wanted a Baha'i news, a Baha'i publishing, you know, a periodical every month. And they elected him as the editor and Charles Gaines as the associate editor. And Charles Gaines at this time starts to see that Rex King was using him. So he writes to the Guardian and asks the Guardian if he can withdraw from that National Spiritual Assembly. And also, he wanted to withdraw from the Baha'i religious faith. So the Guardian wrote back, he says, Charles, you not only can withdraw from that National Spiritual Assembly and the Baha'i faith, but with my blessings. In other words, the Guardian was very astute. And Charles Gaines just saw that he didn't want to be a part of what was going on. So they elected another person in his place, Jimmy something or other, I think of it. And he'd come up from Panama. He was working for the United States government at Panama. And he only had a bachelor's degree, and they said if he got a master's degree, he would get more money, he'd get a higher position. So he came up to Boulder to go to the college there, and it's right at the time when Charles Gaines withdrew. So they elected him to fill the place. And by this time, the thing was getting into, he was coming up with one thing right after another. And I says, Rex, I said, listen, I says, the Guardian made a convention call that this National Assembly should deal with two problems and two problems only, which was the saving of the waivers and the coordinating the teaching. And I said, we haven't done either. I said, nothing is being done in this. I said, you've got about a dozen different committees. And it's just about this time the Guardian was writing to Rex. He says, Rex, he says, I didn't want all of this. He says, you're doing it like if you had millions of followers. He says, you have only several thousand. He says, why all these committees? Why all of this stuff? You know what I mean? He says, you don't need all of that stuff. He says, get rid of those committees. See? But Rex wouldn't do this, you know. And more committees and more control. Finally, one of them makes a motion that after he talked for a while, he made a motion that only he could decide who was a Baha'i and who wasn't on the new ones that were teaching. If they would come in, that he would decide when they send in their application to become a believer that he could decide this. If he decided no, there wouldn't be one. If he decided yes, there could be one, see? And that passed 8-1. I write to the Guardian about that. And finally, there were so many things coming in so fast that I talked against all of these things that he was doing to take over the faith. And there was a woman on that assembly, her name was Marion Rhodes. And every time I'd open my mouth, she would go into a fit and foam at the mouth and even get in roll on the floor, you know. And we had a psychiatrist on there, Dr. Frayne. I says, Dr. Frayne, I says, this woman's going to bust a gut if I says, you don't give her a shot of something, you know. So she gave her a shot and calmed her down. And they told me, just don't talk so much. You know, I said, I very seldom talk. I said, the only thing when I do is she goes into it, see. He says, yeah, but you see what happens when she does, you know, see. So this went on for a while. So finally I told Oppo, I said, listen, I said, they won't let me give my views, and according to Shoghi Effendi, that it should be the free expression of views of any of the members of this administration, you know. And I said, they just cut me off. I want to talk on the different things we're voting on, and she goes into the fit every time. So I said, I want to write a letter and send it to each member, you know. So we wrote about a 10 or 12-page letter. And in there I mentioned that Rex King was becoming a second Horace Holly, and that he was doing the same thing that Horace Holly did, and that we should have loving consultation. He's taken over the faith. He's the one that decides who's going to be the guardian. He's the one that And now that Charles Gaines is gone, he's the only one that writes the journal. He's the correspondent. They'd also passed that I or nobody else was able to write to any of the different assemblies because he was the secretary. Only the secretary could write to the other Baha'is in other places. And that's not Baha'i, you know what I mean? And I mean, it was a real clincher, see? So after I wrote this letter, a big storm the next session, you know. And they decided that they was going to set up the next assembly meeting, they was going to set up a Baha'i court. And that they was going to bring me before it, and they was going to castigate me and throw me out of the Baha'i faith. So another letter went out to the Guardian, and he says, back, cease and desist, you know. And during this interim, he was writing to Rex King, he was writing to Audie Petzel, the president. He was saying, now if you people down there don't straighten out, you can get back to the call of the convention, which is to save the waivers and to organize a teaching effort. He says, I'm going to dissolve that assembly. And I think we had at least a half a dozen letters from the Guardian just on this one point, you know. So as it went on, Rex King got more control and more control and more control all the time. And finally, I found out how I happened to get his name Rex King. He tells the story that he was born in a Polish family and it ended with the SKI in Chicago. It's second Poland. And of course, like we have North Dakota jokes here, where they have the Polish jokes, you know, how dumb they are and so forth, you know. Sort of a racial thing, but more or less for humor, you know. But children growing up in Chicago if they're Polish, they're looked upon as if they're dumb, you know what I mean? Just like North Dakota is looked upon as being dumb, see? And finally, Rex King's father was I think he was a Methodist minister. He was a Christian minister. And he was very, very much put down by his father. He had to be that good little boy, the example in the community. He wanted to run with the other kids in, you know, in the neighborhood to have fun and do things, and he was very restricted. And he started to see the hypocrisy in his father. He was telling him to be a good boy, but the father was doing a lot of things that was hypocritical. And he found that this was more or less true of the other members of the church too. And he started to hate his father, and he started to hate his name. He started to hate the Christian religion and the church. And he says that he grew up, as soon as he could leave home, he did. And one of the first things he did was to change his name. And Rex is German for king, and King is English for king. So he's King. And this, I studied a lot of psychology, and this shows that this is an inferiority complex. They compensate with a superior attitude to compensate for their feelings. They feel inferior. He felt inferior that he was Polish. Inferior because his father made him feel inferior. And he always was striving to become superior. And thus he gets the name King. His profession was actor, and he always had to lead the show. When he was in the administration under Shoghi Effendi, he was also in battle with the other ones trying to be at the top. And he was in trouble with them because of this. Horse Holly was, of course, a great opponent, you know. So here he comes under the provisions of the covenant, under the Orthodox Baha'i faith, under the Guardian, and because of his inferior feelings, he had to get control of everything. And thus he attacked me, and he got the other believers to go along with him because in order to achieve this thing. Well, after the first year, they usually, every year they elect a new National Spiritual Assembly. It's a year thing. In 1964, I didn't get elected to that assembly. Thank goodness. I'd had enough of it. I didn't really want to be on it in the first place. See? But I didn't get elected to it, and I was living in Joplin, Missouri, and I've been trying to sell my house there ever since 1960 or 61 when the Guardian had asked the Baha'is to move to the mountain because of the oncoming catastrophe. It is well known that in the scriptures that you have to be in the mountains when this happens. And he said it would be a lot better, not only for the war, it would be a lot better for the earth-shifting crust to be up in a high altitude where in the earth-shifting crust there's going to be some inundations and there'll be tidal waves. And he asked the Baha'is to move there, and most of the Baha'is were already up there. A lot of them hadn't left yet. And I couldn't sell my house, and I tried and tried and tried. But right after this happened, now I'd been attending school there. I always intended to take up classes, you know. And I've been studying psychology in the local school there for 4 or 5 years. And when I was in Missouri and other places, I studied psychology and other things, you know. I mean, it added to it. I saw that some of the ills that we suffer are psychological ills due to different psychological processes that trigger it off. And I needed to know why the people do the things that they did from a psychological standpoint. So I had studied psychology there in Joplin, and I was trying to sell my house, and in July or August, a real estate man came to me and he says, Dr. Jensen, he says, that house still for sale? I had a great big sign on it. And he saw the sign. He says, is that still for sale? I says, yeah. He says, how much do you want for it? And I said, well, I told him what I wanted for it. I said, but that doesn't include a commission for you, you know what I mean? I said, you'd have to get it from the buyer. He said, that's all right, that's all right. He says that we're looking at 3 different sites, and he says, yours is the one that was with the one that we really want. And he says, that price sounds pretty good. He says, I'll let you know in a little while. Well, in a few days, he come back with a check for the full price of it, you know. And of course, I paid off. I had a mortgage on the thing, paid it all off. And then I moved to Missoula, Montana. The reason I moved to Missoula is that it was the only city in the state that had a graduate school of psychology. That is in clinical psychology. The other ones just had an undergraduate school. And I'd already covered the subjects in the undergraduate school in clinical psychology, and I didn't want to repeat any of them, and I didn't want to get a degree in it or anything. I just wanted to continue on in the study. So I came to Missoula. And how I happened to come to Montana is that I had reciprocity from my Missouri license to almost all the states in the Rocky Mountain area. But they only take so many by reciprocity each year. 1, 2, or 3, something like that. And for some reason or other, the only one that at that time that I could get licensed for was Montana. So, and I wrote to the different colleges here, and I found that this is the only one that had a graduate school, so I moved to Missoula. And we got here, and we stayed out here at the Treat Room Motel, and for about a month while I was looking for a piece of property. And we finally bought that place on Stevens Avenue, Stevens and Orange, 328 Stevens Avenue. And it was a house, and the attic was just a attic unfinished. So I finished the attic and made an apartment, and I made the rooms downstairs for treatment rooms and examining room and waiting room and so forth. And then I opened up, and I put an ad in the paper stating that I had now opened for practice, and I had already registered my license in the courthouse, for practice. And I enrolled, and I was already enrolled in we moved up there in September, and just in time for me to get in when the classes started at the university. But it was about 2 or 3 weeks or a month after that I was open for practice, maybe sometime in October or November, open for practice. And I wasn't open but a week. I had that ad in the paper. I had a visit by a man by the name of Dr. K. And he told me that, he says, I'm Dr. K. And he says, I'm the president of the Montana Chiropractic Association. I was practicing natural medicine and chiropractic under the chiropractic law here that includes both. And he says that he was the president of that, and I says, well, I said, I got my license here, you know. He says, I know your license. And I said, well, you want to see around the place? No, he just says, I just want to come by and visit you. I said, well, fine. And I said, anything I can do for you? He said, well, he says, why did you come to Montana? I said, well, because this is, I got a license here, and I wanted to move to the mountains. And why you want to move to the mountains? I said, well, that's a religious or personal thing. And he said, well, why to Missoula? I said, well, I'm studying clinical psychology over here. I'm enrolled in the school and enhancing my knowledge in psychology. I said, it's the only school in the state that teaches clinical, the graduate school of clinical psychology. Well, he said, well, Dr. Jensen, he says, when you get through with your course there, he says, get out of town. I said, well, get out of town? I said, why? He said, well, he says, the chiropractors are starving here. He says, we don't have much of a practice. And he said, it would have been better if you'd have went to some other place in Montana, such as Butte or someplace else, he says. But he says, they're just not making it here. Well, I says, are they practicing natural medicine? He says, no, just straight chiropractic. And I said, well, I said, if they would practice natural methods, I said that they would, they would get their people well, and they would, and people would come to them. And he said, well, they don't have degrees in natural medicine as you and I have. He had a degree in natural medicine too. He said they don't have a degree in it, and therefore they can't practice it. They don't know natural medicine. I said, well, we could hold classes, and teach them this. Oh, he says, you'd be insulting these people, you know what I mean? Come up with something like this, just coming to town, you're going to teach them how to practice, And I said, well, I intend to stay here, I said, regardless of what you think or anybody else think, I says, if they don't like it, they can drop dead, I said, I'm going to stay here. I said, I bought property and I'm established here and I intend to stay. So he says, well, I says, don't get sore at me, he says, because, it was just a matter of things like that, see. He says, show you that I'm not angry with you and telling you to go. He says, I belong to the Exchange Club here. And he says that we have a meeting every Tuesday. I think now they're having it every Thursday, but I think it was the only Tuesday. And he says, I'll come by, we have it at noon. He says, I'll come by and pick you up and we go down there and I'll buy you a lunch or a dinner. Well, I said, that's fair enough. So we went down there and I found that this was a very political sized thing. That there was, the mayor was there and the people of the city council was there. There was different ones from on the legislature that was there. Several judges were there. And he introduced me to Judge Brownlee, and I think Judge Green was there. And he also introduced me to different senators and representatives there. And, he's trying to impress me, And then he says, Dr. Jensen, he says, I'm on the Central Committee of the Missoula County Democratic Society. And he said, we are the grassroots here in Missoula. And he said, these men that I introduced you to, I had a hand in getting them elected, and they owe their offices to me. And he said, and they know that. He said, without the grassroots of this committee, why, he said that they wouldn't have been able to get elected. And he said, now the Republicans that I introduced you to who are in office, he said, Dr. Gray over here is on the Republican grassroots or committee, And he says that they owe their election to him. And he says, we more or less got the thing sewed up. Of course, the chiropractors are trying to do this all over the nations in a way, because the medics are always trying to get rid of chiropractors, in order to have that political clout. And I said, well, that's nice that you did this. He said, Dr. Jensen, he says, I want to tell you one more time. He said, when you get go through with that course, he says, you get your butt out of town. As a threat, you know. Then he invited me to go down with him to the legislature, which I did, and they had a bill in there which they were lobbying to get through there, you know. So he was right up into his neck, and he went up to the different senators and representatives and shook their hands, and they knew him personally, and they received him, and showing that he was in strong. So on the way back, I told Dr. K, I said, Dr. K, I says, hell and high water, I said, they're not going to get me to leave this state. He says, well, you see. Later, I found out that he and the other chiropractors were Masons, and they were running the chairs, different offices, climbing up to the top. See? And that and then later one of the men in the top, he was a real estate man, I finally bought a house from him, told me that they were cooking up a kettle of fish to try to get me out of town. And what they want to do is to try to get me in court and to have them expel me from Missouri. Well, I didn't know how the hell they were going to try to do that. But I would see them out in front of my office talking to patients as they come out of my office. We call that buttonholing, you know. Grab them and you know, and well, I don't know what they're talking about. And then they were holding meetings at the different chiropractic offices. I go home at night and I pass Dr. K's office, and here would be the cars of the different other chiropractors there, you know. Or Dr. One on Russell and South Avenue. I don't remember all their names anymore. Anyhow, they were having these meetings. And finally one day, the sheriff come and arrested me and charged me with a lewd lascivious act on a minor. And, well, hell, I've never, I was dumbfounded with such a thing, you know. Well, it so happened that the girl that was involved in this was at the time I treated her, she was 15 years old. Her mother and father brought her in, and Opal and I examined her. We found that her complaint was that she had a menstrual disorder, pain on menses. She was constipated, go 3 or 4 days without moving her bowels, and a pain in the lower back. And we figured that this was all associated. The pain in the back, the constipation, and the menstrual disorder. We x-rayed her back, we x-rayed her colon, and we gave her an examination. We found that the uterus that the colon had dropped down on the uterus and flipped it over backwards and was strangling it so that she couldn't, the menses wouldn't come out in menses, you know, and was causing the pain. So it was a common thing that occurs, you know. I mean, this is a very common thing, and chiropractic has been very effective, and natural method has been very effective in treating this. Instead of putting them on Midol and other pills for menses and giving them laxatives and things like this, I laid out a course of treatments, of adjustments to the back. She had some subluxations there. We put her on something called deterge to clean out her colon. She had a mucus colitis, a ptosis of the colon laying on the uterus. We went in and flipped the uterus over forward after we raised the colon. We used galvanic treatment to exercise the muscles there, give her some exercises to take it home for this. And of course, when you're treating a female that has female disorders and has colon disorders, you're going to have to examine these things, and you're going to, and in doing this, now in her case, we couldn't go into the uterus because she's a virgin. She had this, so we went into the rectum, and we found that the colon was backwards. You know, we can do it through the rectum and find this. And now this was all misconstrued in court as being a lewd lascivious act. And it was nothing but a damn bunch of chicanery by the chiropractors in this state that had threatened me time and time again to get me out of this state or out of this city because they didn't want me here. Well, I finally went to trial and was convicted and was sentenced to the Montana State Prison for 20 years. And I was just completely flabbergasted, completely disillusioned. I knew that our system in this country wasn't perfect, and the people in this country claim that it's not perfect. The system itself isn't so imperfect as it is that the political faction is lousy, and that they will do anything. Now this person that tried my case, the assistant county attorney, was running for county attorney. And when he ran for county attorney, he says he sent one of the most dangerous criminals to prison for 20 years, Dr. Jensen. And I had done nothing. The lawyers that defended me says, Dr. Jensen, you have nothing to worry about. He says, my brother-in-law is the county attorney in Great Falls, and he's running for state's attorney. He says, when we go, he says, they paid a lot of women to come in and testify against me, you know. He says, I'm not even going to question these women. He said, because it's all irrelevant. They can't testify to whether what I did with this girl, you know what I mean? Because they weren't present. And he says that after, he says, if you get convicted, he says, my brother-in-law will become the state's attorney and he'll bring it in before the Supreme Court and he'll get a reversal. Nothing to worry about. And therefore, in the trial, if he would have questioned these women, he could have proved that they were just lying, you know what I mean? That they, even maybe that they were getting paid for doing this. But every time when they asked him if he wanted to question him, he said, no, their testimony is irrelevant. It's not relevant to the main to the case. And of course, I was convicted. And then, just after I was convicted, it was time for the election. There was a big scandal took place in Great Falls. That in that district there was prostitution houses running by a madam there that controlled it, and they tried to show that he was receiving bribes, you know, to keep it going. See, and this hit the headlines and it took up the space in the paper just like Oliver North is now. You know what I mean? So that ruined his chances to be elected. And I was convicted and went to the Supreme Court, and there was no brother-in-law to take it in there and get it reversed. So he said that he would continue to defend me all the way up to the Supreme Court. And he says if we lose in the Supreme Court, then we'll start all over again and go back up to the Supreme Court. In fact, he said he'd sue to the last cent of my money, you know. He get me out of it took the rest of his life. Well, my God. I saw I was in a big pickle, so I got in prison. And I says, oh God, why does this misjustice happen to somebody that's been a servant, you know, to the cause of God all these years? Why does this allow such a travesty of things like this? And it didn't shake my faith in God or my religion at all. But there must be answers to this, you know, that God is all powerful. And then I happen to remember in the Baha'i faith it says, we must accept our lot in life with radiant acquiescence. And of course, during the time of the martyrs, there's 10,000 bobbies that went to the chopping block, cut up by knives. They drilled holes in their chests and put lighted candles, paraded them through the streets naked with rings in their nose, with horseshoes nailed to their feet. I mean, all of these things take place in part of God's plan. You know what I mean? And God will allow Jesus Christ to go to the cross. God allowed the forerunner to Baha'u'llah to be martyred. God allowed Baha'u'llah to spend 40 years in prison and in exile. So I said, what is the reason for me being here? You know what I mean? And I was praying and I was studying, going through the Baha'i faith and things like this. And this went on for about 6 weeks, to such an extent that I was wondering, what this was all going to be about. And then I received a letter from the guardian of the Baha'i faith. I'm going to pass this out here to the different ones here, and pass them around. And then here I have one for myself here. So here, it says here, and I got this in my cell at about 11 o'clock in the morning, 10:30, 11, the mail come. And if you see written on the top of it, it says, for Dr. Leland Jensen from the Guardian of the Orthodox Baha'i World Faith. And it says, care of the American Express, Florence, Italy. The Guardian had moved from Washington to Florence, Italy, and he sent this on September the 13th of 1969. I got into prison on August the 8th of 1969. So I was in there about 5 weeks when I get this letter. And this letter here to me, it was greatly overdue. He says, some days ago, I was astonished to have word that Rex King and 2 young men were below wishing to see me. I sent word back to say that I would like very much to see Rex, but not the young men. I had things I wanted to tell him, but not them. I told Rex that no one of my acquaintance had a better knowledge of the Baha'i faith than he, but as Lucifer in the Old Testament days chose to put truth aside and espouse the cause of Satan, so had he done in these modern times, decided that he would now assume the station of Satan in these days of the dispensation of Christ, despite the many opportunities that I had given him to change his evil ways. Yet he refused and blatantly insisted on maintaining his satanic intentions, therefore obliging me to cast him out from all association in this world with the people of God that include the life to come, as well as his life here upon earth, his station to be ever and eternally that of Satan forevermore. Charles Mason Reaney. I was stunned. I said, I had mixed feelings. First of all, I knew that he was very satanic, Rex King. I knew that this was way overdone. I mean, way over, it should have been done much sooner. I was writing in The Guardian what Rex King was doing way back there in 63, 64. And in 64, when I moved to Missoula, I disassociated with myself with everything Rex and these Baha'is were doing down there in Santa Fe. The Guardian kept writing to him, if you don't straighten out, I'm going to dissolve it. And in 1966, he dissolved that assembly. And he wrote to Rex King, and he says, send me the minutes of all the meetings that you've had. And also send me all the correspondence. And Rex King blatantly refused to supply the Guardian at his request, in strict violation of what he was supposed to do. And then the Guardian then found that the Baha'i administration that Shoghi Effendi set up was not the Baha'i administration, that there's no Baha'i administration. No place in any of the writings is there a Baha'i administration. Okay? That he'd resurrected the Babi administration, dressed it up and made it Baha'i. And the Baha'i faith, Abdu'l-Baha said the Baha'i faith is never to be organized. Okay? But Shoghi Effendi found that the only way that he could take and run this whole thing and get this faith spread around it was to have an organization. But the only way is to have an organization, and then when Horace Holly come up with an organization and got it legalized it and everything else, Shoghi Effendi accepted this, And it was along the lines of the Bobby administration that he had, and Shoghi Effendi just started calling it the Baha'i administration. Now, if he just said that it was the Bobby administration was only temporary, that would be one thing. But the people got the idea that this was supposed to become the Universal House of Justice, you know, that this thing. But it was Shoghi Effendi's International Baha'i Council that was to become a world court and then evolve into the House of Justice. And this International Baha'i Council was aborted in 1959 by the Hands of the Faith, and they went and established what they called the Universal House of Justice. But they had it elected not with national spirit or with national houses of justice, but with national spiritual assemblies. And according to the Will and Testament, it has to be elected by national houses or secondary houses of justice. And it didn't have the guardian as its head, and without the head, it couldn't be the Baha'i Universal House of Justice. So the guardian comes up that all of this administration was not Baha'i. So then one might ask the question, well, then what is the Universal House of Justice and the guardian? This is a world government. As the people become Baha'is, this will be the government of the world. We have no Baha'i administration. We're not a religion per se with a religious organization to compete with the Catholic and the Protestants and things like that. We don't have an organization. What Baha'u'llah brought was the kingdom of God on earth, and he says, and Abdul Baha says, is a democratic monarchy, like they have in England. It's not a religion per se, but a democratic monarchy. And the House of Justice will be the democratic part, like the Parliament in England, with the kingship, the guardian being the king. And the guardian is to guard the government by being the Davidic king. That's why it's called the guardian. So he dissolved this National Spiritual Assembly and then declared the administration throughout the world as not Baha'i, and anybody remaining in that administration is outside of the Baha'i faith. So all the covenant breakers out here that have taken over the institutions, that have taken over the money and the role of believers and everything, they're all outside of the faith because they're that has been destroyed or taken out of the Baha'i faith. So here I received this letter from Mason Remy after he had dissolved that administration and that assembly there that I was on. And here Rex King, from the time that was dissolved in 1968 until 1969, busied himself by continued correspondence. He was already the secretary. He had the names and everything else of all the Baha'is in this country, and he had accumulated Baha'is in Europe, as well as the names of the Baha'is that I had and that I brought into the faith in the islands, you know, and also in Africa. And he'd contacted them and started saying that the guardian, in getting rid of this administration, has lost his marbles. You know, the old man's getting old, and that they need to have a younger man to be guardian. And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. Because these people believed that administration was the Baha'i faith. So they were all backing Rex, and he had 500 letters when he went to the guardian here. And he brought 2 of his adopted sons to be witnesses. He was going to have a confrontation with the guardian on this whole question. But the guardian is astute, and he knew what Rex was up to, so he told him, send up Rex, but not the boys, you know what I mean? And when he came in, he embraced Rex and kissed him on both cheeks. And he said, Rex, he says, we're like brothers. He says, when I was in Washington, D.C., one whole summer you came down there, lived at the mansion there, and we did a lot of effective teaching. And we had good times, we went over a lot of the teachings, and he says that you have a wonderful knowledge of the Baha'i faith. He says, but as Satan, he says. He said, for a long time I know now that you've been Satan. And it's probably all the way back to when I was writing to the Guardian, telling him what Rex was doing. That he realized that this man was maybe a loose cannon on the ship, see, that they're accusing Oliver North with him. And this man is a Rhombos. He was like Chorus Holly, and that he corrupted the Baha'i faith under Shoghi Effendi. Here, Rex King was trying to get control and giving the believers what they wanted, give them that organization back in which he would be the Guardian. And he proposed to the Guardian, he was going to propose to the Guardian, that the Guardian appoint him to be the Regent Guardian, which sometimes happens in a kingship. When the king gets too old or the child is too young, they have a regent to take care of the affairs of the king during the time of sickness or old age or when he's youth until he gets old enough to take the throne. So he was proposing that the Guardian appoint him to be regent. But the Guardian says, you're Satan, and expelled him from the Baha'i faith. Well, Rex King then decides that he was deflated. And then he gets a hold of Joe Marangello that had a letter that wasn't supposed to open it until the Guardian passes on. And he tells Joe Marangello, he says, in that letter, he writes to him, in that letter, the Guardian has appointed you to be his successor. He says, open the letter. The man has lost his mind. Calling me Satan, you know. So Joe opened up, and sure enough, he says, after my passing, he says, you are the Guardian of the Baha'i faith. Well, when the Guardian hears about this, he says, well, he says, I told Joel not to open it until I died. He says, now that he's disobeyed me, he could never be Guardian. So he supports supports Joel and gets all the believers away from Masonry under Joel Marangello to be Guardian. Joel was living in Switzerland at that time. And I'd met Joel in France when I was on the way to the islands. Joel and I were kids together, you know, in the Baha'i faith. He was a nice fellow, but he very had an ego too, you know, wanted to be something. So after about a year, Joe had put his son in charge, he got him elected to be the treasurer. And then they found that he was absconding with the funds. He was attending college in Washington. He was taking out girls in expensive limousines and having fast parties and everything else, and spend all the money that was in the fund. So Rex King splits the group, tell them that that Joe is corrupt and his son is corrupt. And then he sets himself up as the Regent Guardian. So now there's there's Joe Marangello's Baha'i faith and Rex King's Baha'i faith. And all of the followers of Masonry in these two groups, a lot of them aren't anything, you know what I mean? And it was corruption. See? So I gets this letter here. He'd gone to see the Guardian in 1969 and presented him with this, that he's to be the Regent Guardian, and here he points him as Satan. Well, I says, it's about time that the Guardian took action on this man, you know. But he didn't do it until he destroyed the Baha'i faith underneath the Guardian. I received this letter at about 11 o'clock. And I read it and I meditated on it, and I wondered just what is going to happen. Practically the whole Baha'i faith is destroyed, you know. So I was somewhat disenchanted. I knew there was an answer to these things. So I went to lunch. It was just about noontime, and we went over to the chow hall, and it takes about 45 minutes for lunch, and I came back. When I came back from chow, I found this Bible that had been tossed in between the bars of my cell, and it landed on my table, and it was open to this page here. There is a stiff page here because there's a picture, a colored picture, and it so happened that it landed open on that, but this was sitting straight up. So when I come back in, I picked it up, and I knew it didn't come down out of the sky and out of heaven. And I held my hand at this place, and I looked in the front, and I found that this was Myron Gardapi's Bible. His parents had given it to him. They thought he might, become religious. And he was going out on parole. He told me a day or two before that that he was going out on parole. And one of the things that they usually do is they leave something of themselves to their friends as a momentum, friendship. And I befriended Myron, and he knew I was religious, and he didn't care about the Bible or religion anyhow. He just threw it in myself. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't want to take it out with him. And here it was open to this page, and I read over here and what it says here, because I'm always a stickler that these things just don't happen by accident. I always feel that there is possibly a bigger reason or cause for things to happen. Many times I'll just take a book and open it up and then start reading, And it usually has a message. Sometimes it's a message that I've been mulling over, the answer to a question I've been mulling over in my mind. There's the answer. So it goes on the next page, and I get over to chapter 3, and I start reading there, and it says, "And he showed me Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing in his right hand to resist him." I said, this is a coincidence. Here's a fellow by the name of Joshua that was opposed by Satan, the same as I was. I was a knight of Baha'u'llah. I had one of the most effective teachers in the United States, bringing thousands of people into the cause. And here, Rex King had taken over the Baha'i faith and destroyed it. So it says that, and he did it. He had to get rid of me, which he did, by the tactics that he did. In order to get this far, he thought he would be able to wrench it out of the hands of the guardian, which he wasn't able to do. So here, Rex King had resisted me the same as this Joshua fellow. And the Lord said to Satan, "The Lord rebuked thee, O Satan." I said, oh my gosh. The Satan got rebuked in the time of Joshua, and here, like Rex King is being rebuked by the guardian here. I was seeing the correlate between the two here, you know what I mean? And I was listening to one of the ministers from the Armstrong group the other night. He says there's always a parallel in the Bible. For instance, something happens in the Bible, and then this is sort of a prophecy of things that might going to take place, or it happens twice. Okay? And for instance, there's been two Christs come. Jesus was the first Christ, Baha'u'llah the second, And it's about the same type of conditions that surrounded them both, takes place with both of them. But I wasn't thinking along these lines. I was just thinking along the lines that here is a coincidence of something that happened to Joshua that's happening to me. And he says, "Even the Lord that has chosen Jerusalem rebuked thee. Is this not a brand plucked out of the fire?" Well, when Rex King come under the guardian, Mrs. Norton said, well, she was the one that was in correspondence with him. And she says, "I plucked him out of the fire, So that happened to come to my mind, that here this man was plucked out of the fire by Brenda Norton. So then it says, "Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments and stood before the angel." Oh, I said, my gosh. I said, when I got to prison the first time I went to chow hall, going through the yard, and the other inmates sitting out in the yard and stuff, they say, "Dirty jacket, dirty jacket, dirty jacket." The type of beef that I was sent there, a dude in the Civius Act, was called a dirty jacket. Now, if I had committed murder or robbed some old woman of her money or something like that, they would think I was a great guy. But this type of beef, they don't associate with you in prison. It's a dirty jacket. So here I'm wearing a dirty jacket, and this Joshua's wearing a dirty jacket. Wearing a dirty garment. Here's some more of the parallel. "And he answered and spake unto those that stood before him, Take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, Behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass from thee, and I will clothe thee with a change of raiment. Later on, I looked this up in Halley's handbook, for Christians, and they said that this Joshua here was Jesus, that this pertained to the coming of Jesus, Later on, I looked this up. And they referred to it on his first coming. See? Well, Jesus didn't wear a dirty jacket, and he wasn't, like that. So, and he answered and spake unto those that stood before him, take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass from thee, and will clothe thee with a change of raiment. I said, well, now this happened to this Joshua here. Is that going to happen to me? I was wondering, there's a parallel, Then I said, and it says, and I said, let them set a fair mitre on his head. I said, what's a fair mitre? So I looked up in the dictionary, and it was the turban of the high priest. And it's the fair mitre, meaning he gets the turban when he reaches a certain state of spiritual knowledgement and spiritual character and knowledge. He gets the fair mitre. It also refers to the mitre board that the college graduate wears when he graduates. They call it a mitre board, the same type of board that the plasters use to hold plaster. It's a flat on top, see? They call that a mitre board in plastering. So I said, well, he got a mitre board. Is iniquity passed from him? Is this going to happen to me? See? And the angels protested unto Joshua, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, if thou wilt walk in my ways, and if thou wilt keep my charge, and thou shalt also judge my house, and shalt also keep my courts. Well, Shoki Effendi was in the process of establishing national Baha'i courts in the Islamic East when he died. And that's why he was going to have International House of Justice on Mount Carmel in 63, in order for those local courts to appeal to. Okay? And it says, well, is this applying to the Baha'i faith? I started thinking here, maybe this applies to the Baha'i faith too, because there's such a parallel of what's happening in the Baha'i faith. And I will give thee a place to walk among those that stand by. Hear now, Joshua the high priest, and thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men wondered at. For behold, I will bring forth thy servant the branch, and the word branch is in capital letters, capital B, capital R, capital A, capital N, capital C, capital H. And I'm reading from the King James Version. The reason I'm taking it from the King James Version is because this is the Bible that was shoved into the cell. And this is the version I should take it from. The very one that was given to me way back there in 1969. That's about 18 years ago. And this has been in my possession in meetings and when I teach the faith all that time. So it says the branch in capital letters. I said, well, my God, the branch is Abdul Baha. We studied that in Baha'u'llah's covenant when he appoints Abdul Baha to be the most great branch, to be his successor. See? And the branch, all the guardians are called branches. It says that if Shogi Effendi's son doesn't have the spiritual qualities, he must choose another branch. So this is the Davidic kingship. Right? I said, my gosh, this isn't history. This is a prophecy. This is a prophecy of what's going to take place now. At that time when I was there. But I says, oh my gosh, then I started thinking, what am I thinking? What am I saying? Am I this person? I said, far be it from me to have such, thoughts of such a nature. I never, dreamed of being anything, Of course, I didn't know why I was sent to that prison, why I was there, and I was becoming very befuddled, and I didn't feel comfortable with myself or what was happening there. It was very, very disturbing, to say the least. Then he said, for behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave the engraving thereof, saith the Lord of hosts. I says, stone with 7 eyes. I says, how can a stone have 7 eyes? I looked around to see if there's any stones laying around. No stones. I said, a potato could have eyes, you know. But how can a stone have 7 eyes? I counted the bars in my cell and the windows and everything else. I says, well, there's no stone before me. So I don't have to worry about this pertaining to me. And I was very much relieved, you know. I was very, very much relieved that I was, that it didn't pertain to me. And at that moment, I had a visitation. And it says, Dr. Jensen, he says, you are the Joshua of this 3rd chapter of Zechariah. And he says, you will establish the branch in the world. And at first when he told me, it sounded like he says, you are the branch. And I said, get away, I don't want to have anything. Then it comes that I would be establishing it. See? So I told the spirit, or whoever was, angel, whatever it was that was there, I didn't see anything, but I felt something. And I knew that there was a strong presence there, telling me that I was this. And I told him to leave. I says, I don't want to be perverted or corrupted with such a thing. I'm a very practical person, you know what I mean? And if I had practical evidence of something of this nature, I'd accept it. But just because an angel tells me that I'm this or that, like the Spirit of God descended upon Jesus as a dove, or Muhammad, the angel Gabriel came to him in the cave of Hira, you know what I mean? I was like Muhammad. Muhammad ran home to Khadijah, and it says, he was very frightened. He says that an angel told him that he was the prophet of God. And she said, what angel was it? And he says, it was Gabriel. She said, well, Gabriel is a good angel. And if he tells you this, he says, you are the prophet. And she became his first believer. But I didn't have a Khadijah to go home to. I was in a cell. And I was very much disturbed. And I told the angel to beat it, just like Muhammad did. He ran out of the cave, and the angel followed him out. Okay? So he was very disturbed on this. So I said, well, there's no stone with 7 eyes. I don't have to worry about it. So that I just, I said that this would be, you know, it's nothing to worry about. Well, at this particular time, they were trying to get me to go to work. The doctor says I didn't have to work. I had trouble breathing. I have a little bronchitis. And to do work, it riles it up, you know, physical work. I mean, it was things that I didn't have to have any, you know, physical part to it. I'd probably be all right. But he says I didn't have to work. So I've been busy writing. The Guardian Mason Remy had told me that I was going to write a book, and that he was going to publish it. And I never had a chance to write a book. I was always too busy. When I opened my practice in Missoula, I was going to school in the daytime, and I was practicing at night, you know what I mean? And at first I was fixing up the office at night and practicing in the daytime. And I was up to midnight. I was busy from early morning to midnight. I was busy doing things. I never had a chance. All the time I was in Joplin or any place along, I had no time to write a book. But now I have plenty of time, so I started writing a book. I didn't know what exactly to write, but I said I'm supposed to write a book. What am I going to write, you know? So the deputy warden called me up to the office quite often and asked me, Dr. Jensen, don't you think it'd be a good idea for you to take a job here in the prison? I says, I don't need 10 cents a day. That's all they paid, you know. He said, no, he says, but you might go stir crazy in that cell, you know. Oh, I says, I got good company. He said, well, who's in there with you? Well, I says, I got a very good companion. He said, who's that? I said, myself. And I says, I'm good company to me. You don't need to worry about me. And I says, I'm writing a book. I have a typewriter in there. And I'm, you know, getting the manuscript written. Okay, but he kept calling me. Well, one day he called me up there and he said, Dr. Jensen, would you like to go to work? And I said, no. But the day before that, there was a man in the, not the next cell, but the cell down from that. He heard me typing in my cell, and he says, Dr. Jensen, is that you typing? I said, yeah. He said, oh, thank God I found somebody that knows how to type. He says, I'm working in the fingerprint department up there. And he says, I've passed parole and I'm ready to go out on parole, but he says, I don't have a trade. And they told me that if I went out to Rothy Hall, which is about 7 miles from the prison, they have a meat packing plant out there. And he said that if I went out there, they would teach me meat cutting. And they have several jobs of meat cutting available if I would get out there. But they won't let me go out there because they have nobody to fulfill my position there in the fingerprint department because they haven't anybody that knows how to type in the prison. He said, will you take this job? I said, no, I don't want to work. I said, go ahead with your job. You know. So the deputy called me up there again, and he says, what would you do if you was going to go to work? Why, so this here fella in this here next cell to me, or the next cell down from there, that's fingerprinting, and he made parole, and he needs to get somebody to take his job so he can go out and to Rothy Hall and learn meat cutting. He said, that's your job. He said, you can go to work at that. I said, well, I get tired all of a sudden quickly. When I get tired, I says, I have to lay down. And this is one of the reasons the doctors told me that I didn't have to work, because when I get tired, I'm tired. I said, I just have to lay right down right then. He says, all right, we'll make this in part of your work sheet that you, at any time that you feel tired, just tell them that you're tired and you can go up to your house and go to sleep, see? Or lay down, anything you want to do. I said, fine. In that condition, I took it. After I was there for in that job for several weeks, I heard one of the guards saying, they're bringing another one in. Well, I was up in the administration department, and it says that they're bringing another one in through Tower 7. That means they're bringing another convict in, a new convict. And I looked out the window, and here it's a 2-story tower. Upstairs there's a man with a gun and its windows all the way around. Below there's a door to the street and a door to the prison yard. They open the door from the street and he goes into a room. They electrically close the door, lock it, and then they open the door to the prison yard, and a sheriff was bringing a man handcuffed out of that room into the prison yard, and then they come up the steps to the administration. And I asked the guard, I looked out there and I saw this happening. I says, you said that the Tower 7. I says, how many towers does this prison wall have? I said, that is a stone wall out there, isn't it? He said, every bit of it's stone wall. I said, how many towers? He said there was 7. 7 towers. I says, and he said, that's Tower 7. I said, well, where's the other towers? He said, well, over there in that corner is Tower 1, and the other corner is Tower 2, and the other corner is Tower 3, and then in the middle there's Tower 4, and the other corner Tower 5, and then the other corner Tower 6. And he says, you come in through Tower 7, you go out through Tower 7. So I stood up, and I turned around, and every way that I turned, I had a stone with 7 eyes before me. This is a picture of this stone with 7 eyes. Come up closer. This is Tower 7. Down here in this corner is Tower 1. Over here is Tower 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. So no matter which way I turned, I had the stone with 7 eyes before me. Here is the administration building where I was looking out of, right in here, looking out down to here. They was coming in through this tower, coming into the prison yard. So I'm going to give you a copy of this stone with 7 eyes. After this happened, I became very, very disturbed. I just become very emotional. And I told the guard, I says, I'm tired. I says, I have to go and lay down. Oh, he says, go ahead. He says, you can go back to your bailiwick, you know. So I went back up there and I looked in the mirror and I was white as a ghost. I says, my God. I says, this is the only thing that I objected to being this person was that all the conditions wasn't fulfilled. I didn't have a stone with 7 eyes before me. Now I find that I have it before me. I was opposed by Satan on April the 21st of 1963. This is, it started in 628, the 1335 days. Subtract that from the 1335, you get, where you had 628 to it, you get 1963. Abdu'l-Baha said, we've got this already in the testimony, that Abdu'l-Baha said that this was to take place exactly 100 years from Baha'u'llah's proclamation. And exactly 100 years from Baha'u'llah's proclamation, Rex King came and attended that Feast of Rizwan in Santa Fe and started talking against me, which caused me to be elected 9th place, where ordinarily I'd have probably had the highest number of votes. But his object was to do away with me, just like the covenant breakers were trying to do away with the guardian. He was trying to do away with me because he knew I would be guarding the faith. So I was opposed by Satan on that date given by Daniel, and I had the stone with 7 eyes before me, and my mission is to establish the branch, which the covenant breakers have done away with. They've done away with the kingship, the branch. This is succession from Baha'u'llah. My job is the establisher of the Baha'i faith. I fulfilled the prophecies for the 7th angel that Abdu'l-Baha said is going to establish the Baha'i faith. I fulfilled the prophecies. Name, what is the name though? Well, we have to find a name, don't we? Otherwise it doesn't work. So let's go back to the scripture again. And it says here, in that 9th verse of the 3rd chapter of Zechariah, and I'll read it again. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. There's another stone. I was born in a stone house. So, but one of these stones, the one I was born in, and the one I was behind here, one of them would have 7 eyes. And the one I was in here had 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave the graven thereof, saith the Lord of hosts. I'll remove the iniquity of that land in 1 day. Wow. That land. I looked in other Bibles and it says the land. Well, that's my name. The land. Leland, L-E is French for the. When I was over in the French islands and I told him my name is Leland, he says, oh, you're the land, you know. And that's how I happen to know this is my name. And the iniquities of Joshua is going to be removed in 1 day. And in the 4th verse, he says he's going to remove the iniquities of Joshua. Here he's going to remove the iniquities of the land. Well, the iniquity of the land and the iniquity of Joshua was what? The dirty garment. My iniquity was the dirty garment, but that's what I was in prison for. And Joshua's iniquity was the dirty garment. Remember? So the Joshua and the land is the same person. Is the name in which the establisher, the 7th angel, is going to establish the branch. And the reason that I've been able to be successful in doing this is that I fulfill the name. Will you write that up there, Joe? The name is, you write the word name. And then in there you put right after the name, you put the land, put in parentheses Leland, okay, we've got the date up there. Now the name, the address is the stone with 7 eyes. And the mission is to bring forth and establish the branch. That is the Davidic kingship. the continuation of the Davidic kingship. Now, where is this stone with 7 eyes? We need to know to make sure that this is the proper stone with 7 eyes. And I'm reading from the 6th chapter of Zechariah. We were reading from the 3rd chapter, and I'll read there. And I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, there were 4 chariots coming between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of brass. In other versions it says copper. The Hebrew word for copper, brass, and bronze is all the same word, by the way. It doesn't make any difference which one they use. It means the same thing. And the Montana State Prison with the stone with 7 eyes is between the 2 biggest mountains of brass in the world. Butte is the richest hill in the world. They got more copper and brass out of there than any other place in the world. And there's a bigger deposits of copper in Lincoln, Montana. And the Deer Lodge and the prison is halfway between these 2 mountains of brass. Okay? He says he saw 4 chariots coming between 2 mountains of brass, and the mountains were mountains of brass. In the first chariot were red horses, and the second chariot were black horses, the third chariot were white horses, the fourth chariot were grizzled and bay horses. Then I answered and said unto the angel that talked to me, What are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said unto me, These are the 4 spirits of the heavens that go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. See? In other words, these are 4 spirits, not chariots at all. And out of this prison has come the core of the Baha'i faith under the guardianship. This stone with 7 eyes is in the Bible. Joshua the high priest. And if you read it in the Catholic Bible, it says Jesus the high priest. Baha'u'llah fulfilled the prophecies for the second Christ or the return of Christ, which means a descendant of David that's anointed. Okay? But the high priest is not a descendant of David. The high priest is a descendant of Aaron, of the Aaronic priesthood. But Jesus was a high priest not after the order of Aaron, but after the order of Melchizedek. And I'm after that order of Melchizedek. As Melchizedek was the only person at that time in his lifetime that was against the triune God, the paganism that was being established by Nimrod. Jesus was a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, establishing the one true God. But this paganism came into Christianity and took over Christianity. So I'm the return of Jesus, the high priest, whose mission is to fight against this Babylonian whore religion of the Trinity, which I am doing. And I'm establishing it in the world. And as the covenant breakers broke away from this kingship and this branch that's talked about here, I went down just this last April and I sieged the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Jericho, this wall of oppression around the covenant-breaking followers of the covenant breakers, to let the truth trickle through. We made a crack. And all over the United States, they are now talking about what I had done. See? And Jim Quinlan of the Sun-Times has already, and on April the 29th, I sent out a message to the entire community in Chicago, to the various papers, to the various radio stations and television stations. I sent out 130 of them, also with a book entitled Breaking the Covenant by the Hands of the Faith, and another one, The Kingdom of God in America, an introduction to the Baha'i faith. And this is the trumpet sound of this 7th angel. I fulfill the prophecy of the 7th angel, and I made this trumpet sound. And Jim Quinlan is now going to print this trumpet sound, be picked up by the Associated Press, the United Press International, by the radio and television stations, and this trumpet sound be heard all over the world. So my job is to establish the branch and the covenant in the world that the covenant breakers broke. And in the same time, in the same token, we explain in this trumpet sound that Baha'u'llah is a descendant of King David, that he is that great manifestation of God that is to establish the oneness of mankind. His first principle is the oneness of mankind. But the covenant breakers are doing away with this. And therefore, God had an ace up his sleeve, the establisher. Now, if you read some answered questions, starting at about page 55, 56, and go through page 66, you'll find that Abdu'l-Baha explains that Joshua established, in the time of Moses, established his religion in Palestine. He took them across the River Jordan, the 12 tribes, and established their religion in Palestine. He said that Ali was the establisher of Islam. He was the sixth angel. Ali was like Joshua in the time of Moses. And he said that the Bab was like Ali, meaning that he was the establisher of the Babi religion. And then on page 66, Abdu'l-Baha said, the seventh angel is going to come, meaning that he was not the seventh angel, that Baha'u'llah was not the seventh angel, that the Bab was not the seventh angel, that the seventh angel hadn't come yet. He said he's going to come and establish the kingdom. And then in Baha'u'llah in the New Era, he said he would come in 1963. And this is in the chapter where it talks about the prophecies of Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah in the subtitle, The Kingdom of God. In the subtitle, The Kingdom of God. And if you'll read this, he says that in 1963, that this seventh angel, this establisher, would come and establish the kingdom. And I was opposed by Satan on that day, and my ministry started at that date. I was defending the faith against Satan, Rex King. I started right in on that date defending the faith. I was opposed by Satan on that date. And I wasn't elected to that assembly because I was in opposition to Satan. Today I'm not liked by the Christians because I'm in opposition to Satan. And as the papacy wears the fish hat of Satan, he has the cross here of Satan. He has the keys of Satan, Janus and Sybil. And he has the red robe of Satan, the red devil robe. And he is defending what? Of all things, a triune God, a pagan triune God. Now, we're not going to get rid of their religion, per se. But after, it says in the Bible that after this message of the kingdom, and it's in the 24th chapter of Matthew, it says, after this message of the kingdom is brought to the world, then the end will come. And Jim Quinlan is going to bring this message that we had, that trumpet sound that I sounded of the kingdom. He's going to print it in the paper, and this will be printed all over the world. The radio station, television, all over the world will broadcast this. Okay? And then the oppression will come to an end. And then it says, after the oppression of those days, in that same chapter of Revelation, Baha'u'llah says, after the oppression of those days, he said, then he will send out his angels. And you are the angels that are being educated by the horse's mouth, so to speak. You know what I mean? We'll go out and gather the elect from the four corners of the earth. And when we have the 144,000, in the book of Revelation, it states that when the four winds are held back, until the four winds of destruction are held back, until there's the 144,000 of the tribes of Israel. And the Baha'i faith is Israel under its new name Baha'i. Baha'u'llah being a Jew. And he brought a remnant of the 12 tribes of Israel out of captivity to the country of Israel when he went there as a prisoner. And then he made a covenant that whoever accepts this covenant, his sins are forgiven, and therefore he becomes grafted into Israel as I was grafted in. And I'm neither of the tribe of Aaron. I'm not of the Aaronic priesthood. I'm not of the tribe of Judah. I'm not a Christ. But I'm a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, defending this world against the satanic Rex King, the satanic Pope, the satanic Christian religion, the satanic covenant-breaking Baha'is. I'm establishing God's kingdom in this world. I come in the name of the land for Joshua. I come at the address, the stone with 7 eyes, between 2 mountains of brass. I'm establishing the branch in the world. I come in the name, the address, and I came at the date. Nobody in the world will ever fulfill that prophecy because that date is past. Unless there might be other people called Leland or the land in the world. There must be. You know, I mean, I know of some. But there's only been one person that's called the land that had the stone with 7 eyes before him that that brings forth the branch. You know what I mean? That was opposed by Satan in 1963. That is bringing forth and establishing the branch. Therefore, I am this. Now, I don't come up and say, hey, look at me, I'm Jesus. Jesus didn't say, hey, look at me, I am the Christ. Jesus says, look, I fulfill prophecy. Look at the book. He says it's there in the book. And the book of Matthew shows how Jesus fulfills prophecy. Get Halley's handbook, where it talks about the book of Matthew. And he will show you point by point by point where the prophecy in the Old Testament was made and how Jesus fulfilled it in the New Testament. You know. Now, not only do I come in the name, address, date, and profession, but I have many more prophecies in the book besides that I fulfill. But the reason I mention these 4 is because it's the calling card. Only one person in the world fulfills this.